Hey guys. Tonight, we dive headfirst into the muddy cradle of medieval life to find out exactly what it was like to grow up in the Middle Ages. Picture this. You're not in a cozy nursery with pastel wallpaper and gentle lullabies. You're squirming in a dark, smoky hut that smells like goat cheese, moss, and maybe a little despair. The midwife just wiped you down with something that's definitely not sterile. And there's a cat watching you with deep judgment. Welcome to your birth scene. You probably won't survive this, but for now, you're breathing, screaming, and already covered in about 3 layers of superstition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born on a day that probably doesn't matter. There are no official birth certificates. No photo shoots with wooden letter blocks. You arrive into a peasant household. Most likely, where no one writes anything down, and everyone is too busy trying to survive the week. Your name might be chosen based on the saint's day you were born on. Or maybe it's just what your older brother blurted out between bites of porridge. Childbirth itself is an event soaked in ritual. The midwife, usually an older woman with a terrifying knowledge of herbs and screams, manages everything. Your mother lies on a straw-stuffed mattress, gripping the arms of 2 female relatives, probably biting down on a wooden spoon or a clump of cloth. If things go well, you're swaddled tight and handed off like a loaf of steaming bread. If things go badly, well, no one talks about that. Not out loud. Anyway, superstitions are the real midwives here. Iron knives are tucked under pillows to ward off spirits. Bells are rung. Crosses are drawn in the air. If you're slow to cry, someone might shout at you or worse. Sprinkle you with holy water in case you're a changeling. Because yes, people genuinely worry that fairies steal babies. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted more in folklore or as a grim way to cope with birth defects and sudden infant death. Assuming you make it through your first hour alive, you're swaddled tightly very tightly. Medieval swaddling isn't a cute blanket burrito. It's full-on mummy cosplay. Arms bound, legs straightened, head wrapped in a way that would make a modern pediatrician faint. It's supposed to help you grow straight and strong, or at least immobile enough not to roll into the fire. Your first crib is probably a wooden box or even a drawer. If you're from a peasant family, maybe it's just a cradle next to the hearth, softened with straw, old cloth, and possibly a leftover cabbage leaf if you're lucky. If you're noble, you get a carved bassinet. Sure, but it still smells like boiled turnips and your wet nurse's feet. Speaking of wet nurses, that's who's feeding you, especially if your mother's of high status. Wealthy women often handed you over within days to a lactating woman whose job is to keep you alive. Quiet, and mostly clean. There's actually a whole etiquette around this. The wet nurse is chosen carefully. Herdite inspected. Her temperament assessed. No garlic. No onions. No lustful thoughts. Yes. Apparently, impure milk could cause colic or crooked teeth. Meanwhile, no one's entirely sure whether your soul is safe until you're baptized. Some parents rush to church within days, others bribe traveling monks. Babies who die unbaptized are thought to linger in limbo, which terrifies everyone, including the neighbor who once found an owl outside and now thinks it was a cursed child spirit. Your earliest lullabies aren't cute little jingles either. They're half-spoken prayers, warding chants, and sometimes rhymed warnings about what happens if you cry too long. Sleep tight. Oh, and fun fringe tidbit? Some medieval mothers used hedgehog grease eyes. Grease, from an actual hedgehog's, a folk remedy for colic. Supposedly, it soothed bellyaches, or maybe just made you slippery enough to wriggle out of trouble. Of course, your father isn't always there. He might be in the fields, or off in a war, or drinking himself into a bad reputation. Parenting isn't exactly a shared enterprise in most households. Your care is primarily the domain of women, your mother, your sisters, your nurse, your grandmother. If you're lucky, they pass you between them like a soft, screaming loaf. If you're unlucky, you get placed on the floor in a shallow basket and hoped for the best. Your life expectancy? Let's just say medieval infants didn't really bet on a long run. In some places, up to 30% of children died before their 5th birthday. That's if you survived the diseases, the wolves, the curses, and that one time the neighbor tripped over your cradle while chasing a chicken. But for now, you breathe, you squirm, you fuss, and someone wraps another cloth around you, kisses your forehead, and mutters a prayer. You're here, and that alone is kind of a miracle. You're not even a week old, and already you're being cinched into a swaddle tighter than a rolled-up sausage. Every limb tucked, every joint straightened. Your face sticks out from a cocoon of linen, and your arms, nowhere to be found. You look more like a bundled-up loaf than a child. And yet, to your caretakers, this is progress. This means you'll grow correctly, with straight bones and a healthy spine, so they hope. Historians still argue whether swaddling helped or harmed development. But one thing's certain: no one's letting your tiny arms flail freely. Your day is quiet, except when it's not. Screams echo from the hearth as your older sibling drops a pot on their foot. The neighbor's pig has wandered into the kitchen again, and someone's yelling about stolen eggs. Meanwhile, he's strapped in your cloth cocoon like a mildly confused burrito. Occasionally, someone picks you up and rocks you back and forth, while muttering something that sounds suspiciously like, "Please don't be cursed." Oh, your diapers, if you can call them that. Mostly just cloth rags washed sometimes, reused often, and changed only when absolutely necessary. There's no modern sense of hygiene, and the closest thing to baby wipes is a damp wool scrap that's been used for at least 3 other purposes. If you're lucky, your household is rural, and you're soothed by the rhythmic sounds of sheep outside and a spinning wheel clacking nearby. If not, you're in a crowded tenement, your cradle beside 3 snoring relatives, and someone cooking eel stew 10 inches from your nose. The smell never quite leaves. You're growing. Sort of. And once you can hold your head up and maybe babble a little, the family begins to treat you more like a mini-human. Not quite useful yet, but soon. They talk about when you'll start earning your keep. Which is less cute: toddler, milestone, and more. Can you chase chickens yet? You notice things: the sun hitting the cracked window, the bells from the village church, the cat staring at you like it knows something you don't. You don't realize it, but you're absorbing the world through sensations: the scratch of rough wool against your cheek, the smell of old bread and rosemary, the sounds of feet stomping mud off outside the door. It's sensory overload, but it's also home. Sometimes you get passed off to someone else entirely: a neighbor, a cousine, the woman who lives 2 doors down and has 6 of her own, but somehow always ends up with more. Childcare is a communal activity, not out of love, but out of necessity. If someone has arms free, they hold the baby. If not, well, the floor is cleanish. One particularly quirky detail: some medieval parents hung coral beads near the cradle to ward off evil spirits and protect from the evil eye. Coral was thought to have magical properties, even though no one had ever seen an actual coral reef. It just looks strange enough to be useful. Noble children get something a little different. You're still swaddled, but your wrappings might be embroidered, your cradle carved with little lions or vines. And you? Of course, I have a wet nurse whose job is to dote and document every burp, though, let's be honest, that mostly means you're someone else's side gig until you're old enough to be shown off. But whether you're noble or peasant, certain things are the same. Your first steps are celebrated, even if you're wobbling around a mud floor covered in rushes and dropped beans. Your first tooth is cause for superstition. Someone spits on the ground. Someone else knocks on wood. A third person offers you bread and murmurs something about the Virgin Mary. There's a kind of fragile magic in your early days. Not the Disney kind. This magic is earthy and practical, made of herbs, whispers, and instinct. No one's writing parenting books. They're just doing what their mothers did, and hoping you don't cough yourself into oblivion. And still, despite everything, despite the filth, the fears, the fevers, you're cherished. Even when you're screaming at 2 a.m. Even when your clothes need changing. Even when you've somehow managed to roll under the bench and get stuck. Someone always picks you up, even if they mutter about it the whole time. You grow fatter, softer, a little stronger. You grip fingers now. You gurgle at faces. And when your mother leans over your cradle and sings a strange, haunting lullaby, half church hymn, half forest spell, you go quiet, because somehow you know you're loved. Even if you're still wrapped like a winter turnip, you're finally starting to wriggle free of your little fabric cocoon. Not all the ways waddling still rains, but enough to flail a fist and kick one of your feet out dramatically. You've survived long enough to earn a bit more movement, which is medieval baby gold. Crawling begins slowly. You push yourself up on stubby arms and immediately faceplant into the dirt floor, which has, let's be honest, seen better days. Probably back when it wasn't soaked in broth and chicken droppings. Teething? Oh, you poor thing. There are no amber necklaces or silicone rings here. Just pain. A lot of it. And some truly weird remedies. One involves pressing a linen cloth soaked in hare's brains against your gums. Another suggests a drop of wine, yes. Really, because apparently, tipsy babies fuss less. The fringe crowd might even try to pass you under a donkey for good luck. Historians still argue whether those rituals were based on genuine belief or just desperation and boredom. Either way, Good luck. Explaining that in therapy, you're starting to respond to voices, mimic sounds, and play a few primitive games. Peekaboo hasn't quite reached cultural saturation, but medieval caregivers might waggle fingers in front of you or bounce a carved wooden rattle just out of reach. The rattle isn't plastic. It's bone, or maybe metal if you're upper class, and it looks more like a prison shank than a toy. You love it. Around you, the home buzzes with chaotic motion. There's no such thing as a designated baby room. You nap in the same corner where someone is slicing onions and another person is plucking feathers from a very grumpy goose. Life flows around you like a current, and you're just beginning to notice the eddies, one of your main guardians. Likely, your mother or a female relative keeps you close at all times. If she's cooking, you're tied to her back or resting in a cloth sling across her chest. If she's in the garden, you're in a cradle on the edge of the path, shaded by a makeshift cloth canopy and vaguely guarded by a hissing goose. Child safety standards don't exist. The phrase baby-proofing would sound like witchcraft to anyone here. You begin to babble. Ba, ma, and the occasional deeply dramatic screech. Everyone listens like you're a prophet. The local priest chuckles and says it sounds like Latin. Your grandmother swears she heard you curse. Your father insists your first word was his name. It wasn't. By now, you've survived several fevers, some choking hazards, and that one time someone tried to feed you boiled beetroot mixed with beer. You are, officially, a sturdy child. And with that comes more interaction with the world. You're taken to church, even if you can't sit up straight. Baptisms, feasts, and random holy days all include children, not out of sentimentality, but out of routine. You've probably been doused in holy water multiple times just to be safe. Especially if you cried too much under the full moon. Someone tucks an amulet near your cradle, a little charm carved from wood, or a bag of herbs sewn shut. The belief is that it wards off night terrors, evil spirits, or fairies looking to steal human babies. One bizarre fringe belief involves burying your first fallen tooth beneath a hearthstone to prevent impish possession. You don't understand any of this, but it smells weird, and everyone keeps blessing you with urgency. Your body keeps developing, and now you're trying to stand. You hold on to furniture well. Not furniture as we know it, more like a three-legged stool and the edge of a wobbly workbench, and take your first tottering steps. Someone cheers. Someone else warns you'll break your neck. You fall. You cry. Life continues. By now, you might even have a nickname. Something bizarre like Stinkfoot or Piglet. Medieval nicknames weren't always cute, but they were often affectionate in their own weird, grumpy way. If you're noble, you might have a formal name with 5 syllables and a nickname like Mouse. If you're peasant-born, you're probably just boy, until further notice. The animals are your roommates. Cats walk across your chest while you nap. Dogs try to steal your bread crusts. A piglet once gnawed on your toes, while everyone else was busy salting fish. You're not afraid. The animals are part of life, like the wind or the dark. And the dark? That's starting to scare you. You don't have words for it. But you don't like it when the hearth dims and the corners stretch longer. Nighttime stories are full of witches, werewolves, and things that crawl up from under the floorboards. One night, you scream until someone gives you a carved token to clutch. It smells like lavender and dust, and you don't let go of it for a week. Some of your peers won't make it past this stage. Illness, accidents, or sheer misfortune carry many off. You don't understand yet what it means when someone's cradle is empty the next day. But you feel the silence like a draft across your back, and so, wrapped again less tightly this time, you're laid down with a prayer muttered over your brow. The fire pops. The wind sighs against the shutters. And someone, somewhere, sings low under their breath, their voice trembling like a spider thread in candlelight. You sleep. You grow. You endure. You're upright now, stomping around in soft leather shoes that squish slightly when they touch anything remotely damp, which is, unfortunately, everything. The floor is a lively mix of straw, ash, and crumbs. You fall a lot. Your knees are perpetually scraped, and your tunic hangs crooked, stained with yesterday's stew and whatever mystery goo you stepped in earlier. Congratulations. You're officially toddling through your medieval childhood. Chores are starting. Not pretend chores. Not helping mommy chores. Real ones. You're maybe 4 years old, and someone hands you a broom taller than you are. You're expected to sweep the hearth, carry sticks, or keep the chickens from escaping again. There's no sticker chart. No good job, gold star. Just a grunt of approval if you don't lose the firewood. Your hands are small, but they're already blistering. You try to copy the older children, who skin rabbits, or spin thread, or stir enormous pots of something unidentifiable. If you're a boy, you're learning to follow your father or uncle, imitating how they tie knots or repair tools. If you're a girl, you're being shown how to knead dough and scald linens, though half the time you end up licking the bowl and getting chased out with a ladle. Sometimes you're left in charge of a toddler sibling. You, age 5, are considered responsible enough to keep another human alive for a few hours, which mostly means keeping them from climbing into the fireplace or drinking the vinegar barrel. It's not glamorous. But if everyone comes back alive, you've done well. Play exists, but it's never separated from life. You don't go to a playroom. You find fun where you can. You make a doll out of a rag and a carved stick. You tie twine around beetles and race them on the windowsill. You and your friends gather pebbles and pretend they're soldiers. It's imaginative, if mildly disturbing, and you learn from pain. The hearth burns you once, and you remember it forever. You fall into the water barrel and nearly drown. And now you're terrified of anything deeper than your ankles. Your knowledge is tactile, sensory, a blend of caution and curiosity, like a very grim Montessori classroom. You're being watched, but not closely. Adults are around, but they're busy. If you're not actively bleeding, they'll probably let you explore. That's how you learn which berries make you vomit and which bugs bite. And that, my tiny friend, is how childhood worked for centuries. There's still wonder in your world. When the sun hits the stained glass at church and spills reds and golds across the floor, you think it's magic. When you see a maypole for the first time, wrapped in ribbons and surrounded by dancing villagers, your jaw drops. You might not understand the rituals, but they burn into your memory like a fairy tale. Meals are a mixed bag. If you're peasant-born, your daily fare is heavy on gruel and onions. If you're lucky, a turnip. If you're noble, there's more variety: meats, cheeses, even sweets on feast days. But everything is still room temperature at best. And hands are the primary utensils. Either way, you eat what's available, not what you like. At night, your world narrows. The fire is banked. The animals settle. Your family, extended and immediate, sleeps in the same room, bundled in layers, sharing warmth and lice. Someone snores like a dragon. Someone talks in their sleep. You dream about the boar mask the mummer wore last week, and wake up crying, only to be told to hush and roll over. The church looms in your life. Even if you don't fully get it, you're dragged to Mass, where Latin drones around you like bees, and you're expected to kneel, even if your knees hurt. You learn the stories: Noah, Mary, the devil, and assume they're as real as your neighbors. Heaven is beautiful, but hell is terrifying. You spend a lot of time making mental lists of your sins just in case. Still, you laugh. You belly laugh when a pig gets loose and a grown man falls into the mud. You shriek with joy when a dog lets you chase it in circles. Your joy is wild and loud and entirely your own. No one's told you to smile for a portrait. You grin because life, for a brief moment, feels like it belongs to you. You're beginning to notice social rules. You see who's allowed to speak at the table, who gets slapped for interrupting, and who mysteriously vanishes when they defy the wrong person. You don't fully understand it, but you sense it in your bones. The world is full of layers, and you're somewhere near the bottom. For now, sometimes, you're taught a song, a rhyme, a little charm whispered before bed or mumbled over herbs. These stick with you. You repeat them to yourself while you fall asleep, or while you tiptoe past the graveyard. These verses are your armor. They may not rhyme well, but they feel like protection. So you sweep. You stumble. You sing. You pull your tunic over your head and race barefoot down a path, mud between your toes and wind in your mouth, laughing so hard it echoes off the fields. You're a medieval child. And for this moment, you're free. You're no longer just a background blur in the village. People know your name well, your nickname, and start expecting things from you. You're maybe 6, maybe 7, and the bar for being considered useful is laughably low by modern standards, but impressively demanding in your century. If you can hold a bucket, you can haul water. If you can count to 10, you can tally hens. If you can walk without falling over, congratulations, you're now officially helpful. Your tasks grow steadily stranger. One day, you're asked to chase geese out of the herb garden. Another, you're told to keep an eye on the family pig, who has a nasty habit of wandering into the churchyard. And yes, that actually matters, because in medieval towns, pigs and public spaces collide often, and not always peacefully. There's a reason pig-related injuries were a real legal category in some places. Historians still argue whether these pig court cases were exaggerated in frequency or just delightfully weird. At home, your value is measured in chores done, not feelings shared. If you're a boy, You're expected to shadow the men. Maybe that means tending the fire, fletching arrows, or watching someone repair a fence with more grunts than nails. If you're a girl, you're most likely beside your mother or aunt, scrubbing things, sewing crooked stitches, or stirring porridge until your arms shake. And yes, you're praised for obedience, not creativity. But medieval kids were scrappy. You find loopholes. You turn chores into games. Herding geese becomes a tactical mission. Collecting firewood becomes a race. Even hauling chamber potsies. Chamber pots gets its own competitive twist when someone dares you to swing it like a slingshot. Spoiler, that doesn't end well. You begin to notice status. The miller's boy has shoes. The blacksmith's daughter eats honey. You, maybe not so much. You start associating fabric types with power. Velvet means untouchable. Wool means normal. Sackcloth means don't ask questions. Class is stitched into every seam. And you're beginning to see where you fit on the ladder even, if you're still clinging to the bottom rung. But occasionally, you get to witness something thrilling. A traveling merchant arrives. He opens his cart, and it's full of wonder, dyed ribbons, carved trinkets, maybe even a polished glass bead. You stare like it's treasure. It basically is. You beg for one, offering a chicken feather and a wildflower as trade. He laughs. You get the bead anyway. You don't understand currency. But you understand value, especially when it glimmers in the light. There's still a lot you're afraid of. Thunder makes you dive under benches. Owls mean death in some stories. And you eye them suspiciously. You've heard tales of changelings' fairy children swapped with human baby sand once. When your little brother gets sick and stares off into space, someone whispers that it might not be him anymore. You sleep with one eye open after that. At night, your bed is a pile of furs or old straw, likely shared with a sibling or two. Fleas are inevitable. Someone always kicks you in the ribs. But you're used to it. And when the moonlight spills across the floor and you hear distant howling, you pull the blanket tighter, bite your lip, and remind yourself of the protective charm stitched into your pillow's corner. Workdays are long, but feast days break the rhythm. On holidays, there's actual food, not just porridge and music. You might get a new shirt. You might get to watch a puppet show. You definitely get to stay up late and watch grown-ups dance badly. You laugh until your belly hurts and fall asleep leaning against someone's leg. Your ears full of lute music and someone trying to recite a proverb while very, very drunk. You learn quickly. If you fall behind, there's no hand-holding. People expect you to keep up. They tell you to stop crying. They tell you to be brave. You learn to nod, to carry things bigger than you, to say yes when you mean no. You harden. Slowly, like clay in the sun. Still, you dream of climbing the castle wall, of stealing a knight's helmet, of one day eating nothing but apples and honey. You stare at the horizon sometimes and wonder what's out there. And even if you can't name it, you feel something ancient in your chest, tugging you towards stories. You're not old enough to live yet, and so you grow. With scraped hands and stubborn courage, with wild laughter and aching feet, you become a small, tireless engine of motion and noise. Half child, half apprentice, fully human, in a world that rarely stops to notice. But you're here. You're watching, learning, waiting. Now you're nearly 10. Maybe older, though. No one keeps strict track of birthdays unless you're nobility. Your age is more of a vibe than a number. You're taller, leaner, and finally capable of real tasks that might actually matter. And just like that, childhood starts slipping into utility. You're no longer the wide-eyed village sprout. You're expected to pull your weight. You rise with the sun, your breath fogging in the cold morning air. If you're in a farming family, you trudge out with a stick to prod the goats along, cursing your luck as one of them tries to chew your sleeve. You're still not strong enough to plow, but you can scatter feed, haul buckets, and trap chickens in corners they don't want to be in. And you do it because no one else will. Or because your mother's already threatened to turn your shoes into kindling if you complain again. Meals are still modest. Bread, onions, and maybe cheese if the cow's been merciful. Sometimes there's fish, salted to the point of becoming a chewable mineral. You eat quickly, not because you're in a rush, but because flies show up like they've been invited. You swat them away with the back of your hand, dreaming of a life where dinner doesn't buzz. School? Not unless you're born to a merchant, a noble, or the monastery. If you're a peasant, letters and numbers are exotic mysteries. You learn by doing, by watching someone bake 12 loaves and memorizing the proportions, or by hearing the same tale of St. George so many times you can recite it backward. Education is oral, physical, grimy, and incredibly effective when your life literally depends on knowing how to gut a fish. For some, though, especially boys, lucky enough to live near a church or under the care of a curious noble, schooling happens. You sit on a cold bench while a priest smacks a ruler for emphasis. You fumble through Latin vowels and draw lopsided letters with a stylus on wax tablets. Your fingers cramp. Your back aches. And still, it's better than weeding turnips. Meanwhile, your friendships become sharper, full of dares and double dares. You climb trees you shouldn't. You throw rocks you regret. You once chased a fox and ended up stuck in a bramble patch. Bleeding but laughing. Games get rougher: wrestling, stick fighting, or variations of throw mud at the guy with clean clothes. You're forming loyalties and rivalries that feel mythic, even if they last 3 days. And then there's your first real exposure to mortality. Maybe an older villager doesn't wake up. Maybe a friend's little brother gets a fever and fades fast. You stare, stunned, as the body is carried to the churchyard. You see your parents go quiet. You ask questions. But no one really answers, just whispers of God's will and a quick sign of the cross. And suddenly, the world isn't just chores and jokes. It's fragile. 2. Your dreams grow bolder. You imagine being a knight, a merchant, even a monk. Because at least they have ink and soft robes. You dream of traveling across the sea, or seeing a real city, with towers and marketplaces and things that sparkle. But when you mention it aloud, someone ruffles your hair and tells you to go clean the chamber pot. Girls your age face even earlier expectations. You're learning how to manage a hearth, patch clothing, and keep a toddler quiet with a song and a pinch of bread. If your mother was married at 14, there's already talk of who you might wed in a few years. And by talk, of course, we mean negotiations over goats and barley. Love stories exist in song, not in contracts. Still, your days have rhythm. Chores at dawn. Work mid-morning. A pause in the heat of the day. More work. A meal. A fire. If you're lucky. A story. And on special nights, someone plays music badly. Yes, but from the heart. You tap your foot and grin, with your mouth full of crusty bread. You learn dozens of tiny tricks. How to find a leak in a roof by following the smell. How to test if stew is burned without burning your tongue. How to fake a limp, just well enough to get out of hauling firewood, though only once, before someone sees through it, and you start noticing things in adults that you'll remember forever. The way your father wipes his hands on his pants before lying. The way your mother sighs before giving bad news. The way the village drunk tells the same story of the dancing ghost every feast day. And yet you still listen like it's new. Historians still argue whether medieval childhood ended around age 12 or just blended invisibly into adult labor. But you can feel the shift already. No one carries you anymore. No one sings to you, but they trust you with the fire, with the animals, with secrets, and somehow, that's even better. You still laugh. Though, at absurd things, at dirty jokes muttered under your breath, at the pig who's learned to open the garden gate. You might be growing up fast, but you haven't lost your mischief. And as you curl up at the end of another dirt-streaked day, you find a little beetle crawling near your sleeping mat. You cup it gently in your hand. Whisper a spell you heard from a traveling tinker. And release it through a hole in the wall. Just in case it really is a fairy, you're officially a tween. Even if no one uses that word. In your world, you're either a child or you're notent. You're quickly being nudged into the not category. You're strong enough to carry a sack of barley without toppling. Fast enough to chase off crows from the drying laundry. And responsible enough to be left alone with a pot of boiling cabbage. That last one? A real honor. If only mildly fragrant. By now, your identity is braided into your surroundings. You know the village layout better than your own limbs. You could walk it blindfolded past the crooked chapel, the baker's soot-stained wall, the 2 trees where the dogs like to sleep. Your feet know every dip in the road, every puddle that never quite dries. You belong here, in the hum of chores, in the rhythm of gossip, in the smells of yeast, sheep, and dung. You're working more. Yes, but also watching, learning, mimicking the adults. You learn how to barter in the market without sounding desperate. You start practicing how to make your voice deeper, or how to laugh, like you've heard a joke you actually understand. Spoiler, you usually don't, but you pretend. Boys might be sent to apprentice with a blacksmith, a carpenter, or a merchant thief. They're lucky. That means waking up before the sun, sweeping the floor, doing grunt work, and slowly earning the right to touch tools, not use them. Mind you, just touch. Apprenticeships can last years, and you're expected to be grateful the whole time. Historians still argue whether apprentices were genuinely mentored or just unpaid child labor with matching tunics. Girls often don't get apprenticeships unless it's to become a seamstress, herbalist, or midwife's assistant. And those jobs aren't glamorous. They're messy, quiet, and full of tasks that make your hands red and raw. You might be boiling linen one day and holding someone's screaming baby the next. And yet, the knowledge you absorb about plants, childbirth, illness, healing is more valuable than coin. There's a festival this week, and the whole village buzzes with it. You're told to help set up, hauling benches, stringing garlands, helping the baker roll out sweet buns with more effort than sugar. But the excitement is infectious. You whisper with friends about what games might be played, what travelers might show up, and whether there'll be a juggler this year who doesn't drop everything. The day arrives, and it's glorious. The square fills with color and chaos. There's dancing awkward but earnest. There's drinking much of it disguised as holy toasts. And there's storytelling. One man claims he saw a dragon's shadow in the Welsh hills. Another swears his grandfather once outran a werewolf. You listen, wide-eyed, and file every detail away. Later, you slip off with your friends. You sneak behind the baker's stall, steal 2 slightly burnt tarts, and laugh until your stomach hurts. You lie in the grass, staring at the stars, talking about where you'll go someday. To the sea, to the mountains, to Rome, maybe, or at least to the next village over. Quieter moments creep in. 2. You begin to think more about the future, not just surviving it, but shaping it. You watch the older teens with a mixture of admiration and terror. They look so confident, so tired, so married. You wonder what your path will be. Will you own land? Join the clergy? Get married by 14 to someone who smells like pickled herring? There are strange lessons now. You learn that some people are not to be trusted, especially if they smile too much. You learn that rumors spread faster than bread rises. You learn that adults sometimes lie, and that sometimes lying is what keeps the peace. You overhear arguments about crops, debts, and curses. You don't understand all the words, but you understand the tension, and you file that away. 2. There's also the local hermit. Every village has one. This one wears a rope belt, talks to birds, and once screamed at a turnip for being too smug. You're both terrified and fascinated. One day, on a dare, you approach him with an offering, a small loaf and a feather. He looks at you, takes the feather, and mutters something about dreams and bones. You leave quickly, and for the rest of the week, you swear your dreams feel stranger. You don't tell anyone. You're changing. Your body creaks in new ways. Your voice cracks like a poorly tuned lute, and you start to feel embarrassment, like deep, soul-rattling embarrassment, usually for things that would never have bothered you before. You suddenly care how your hair looks. You suddenly care if you're seen with your little brother. You suddenly care if someone sees you trip over your own feet while pretending to be a knight. You notice the opposite genderer, maybe the same, gender in new, uncomfortable ways. A glance lasts longer. A joke lands harder. Your stomach does strange flips, and your brain turns to porridge. You deny everything when asked. Of course, but the changes are happening. Like it or not, you're growing faster than your clothes. Your sleeves shrink overnight. Your shoes pinch like vices. Your tunic once hung to your knees now. It barely covers your thoughts. But there's pride in that. in being mistaken for older, in hearing someone say, "He's becoming a man," or "She's nearly ready for marriage." The milestones are vague, but the pressure is real. You're not quite a child anymore, not kite-grown, just drifting in the strange, smelly, exhilarating in-between. You wake up to a rooster scream, because no medieval rooster ever crows. They scream, and so begins another day in the dirt-smeared theater of your childhood. But today, you feel it in your bones. You want to play. Work still comes first. Always. You help shovel muck from the pig pen, skin your knuckles on a rough wooden pail, and dodge a surprisingly vengeful goose. But in between the chores and the lectures, and the side-eyes from older siblings, you scheme. You find pockets of time. You find other kids. And when you do, the whole world shifts. Suddenly, the village is a battleground, a forest, a royal court. Your imagination does more than pass time. It transforms time. That pile of hay, now a fortress. That stick, a sword blessed by Saint Christopher himself. That poor beetle you tucked into your tunic, your noble companion, until someone screams about bugs in clothes again. You play with what you have, and what you have is random. A carved wooden ball, a dead rabbit's foot you're convinced is lucky, an old rag doll with one eye and zero patience, maybe a hoop made from a bent piece of iron, or a skipping rope spun from horsehair. You have walnut shells you've painted with crushed berries to look like boats. They float kind of, sometimes, with optimism. Games get weird. There's kick the bladder, which is exactly what it sounds like, pig's bladder inflated into a makeshift ball. Chase through the village until someone falls in something unmentionable. There's stick and hoop. King of the mound, blind man's bluff, and the endlessly popular throw things at the blacksmith's fence until he notices. If you're noble, your toys are fancier, carved figurines, miniature horses, maybe even a chessboard if someone's feeling scholarly. But even then, kids do what kids always do, lose half the pieces and make up their own rules anyway. You climb trees with bark that eats your skin. You dig for worms you pretend are dragons. You dare each other to kiss frogs. One of your friends claims he saw a frog with 2 heads once. And now, everyone swears the pond is cursed. You start throwing pebbles at it just to be safe. Then, there's music. Well, something like it. You make flutes out of reeds, bang on pots, and hum the same tune until someone threatens exile. If you're lucky, a traveling minstrel swings by with an actual lute, and you're mesmerized for days. You'll try to imitate the sound using a piece of twine and a bent stick. It doesn't work, but the effort counts. Not every game is innocent. Wrestling turns into shoving. Races turn into fights. One boy throws a stone too hard. A girl gets bit defending her turn with the doll. You nurse bruises, wipe dirt from your eyes, and sulk for an hour before returning to the chaos like nothing happened. Sometimes, play serves a darker function. You reenact executions with dramatic flair. One child always insists on playing the hangman. You pretend to try witches and chase criminals through the village. No one corrects you. These stories are part of your air. Your bedtime. Your daily walk past the stocks. And then there are the storieso. The stories. You whisper them between games. About the ghost that haunts the bakery. The lady in white who walks the hills. The demon trapped in the well. Some of them are older than your grandparents. Some were invented last Tuesday. But they stick. You repeat them until even you aren't sure which are real. At festivals, games get bigger and louder. You chase pigs with ribbons tied to their tails. You join races with one shoe on, one off. You juggle apples badly. And the maypole? A total mystery. All you know is you're supposed to run in a circle, get dizzy, and not throw up. Usually, you fail at one of those. Historians still argue whether medieval children were allowed to be children in any meaningful way. The answer is somewhere in the games, in the laughter behind the barn, in the wild giggles, during a midnight, dare to knock on the priest's door and run. You don't have free time the way modern kids do, but you steal joy in moments. And guard it, like treasure. You learn to make fun out of sticks, stones, and imagination. You learn to laugh even when your legs hurt from fieldwork. You learn to turn a bad day into a story, and a story into a game. And somewhere, in the shadow of adult responsibilities, you carve out a secret world that is entirely yours. Night is falling, and the small cottage you call home is already crowded. It always is. You squeeze through a tangle of arms, elbows, cloaks, and cooking pots to find a corner to sit if you're lucky. If not, you're perching on a stool that wobbles like a drunken monk. Welcome to family life in medieval times, where personal space is a concept no one has invented yet. You live with a lot of people. Parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent or two. And if misfortunes really flex and gan uncle who smells like dried fish and tells the same story every night. The house is small, low-ceilinged, and somehow always smoky, even when no one's cooking. The walls are wattle and daub, which is just a fancy way of saying sticks and mud. And the roof leaks in 3 different languages. Beds? Rare. Most kids sleep together, squeezed like pickles in a barrel. You and your siblings lie shoulder to shoulder, occasionally knee to face. Someone always hogs the blanket. Someone else always talks in their sleep. Someone always farts and blames the dog. It's Kay's, but it's yours. You know your siblings better than you know yourself. You fight like wildcats over food, over chores, over who gets the dry side of the bed. But you also depend on each other fiercely. You share stories, schemes, and the occasional stolen apple. You whisper late into the night about what you'd do if you were king or queen. Spoiler, the plans usually involve more pies and fewer chores. Your older siblings may already be apprenticed or married off. Or in some cases, dead. You notice their absence in strange ways, the quiet where their voice should be, the extra bowl at dinner that no one fills. Childhood doesn't always come with longevity. Your parents? They're there. But often in the background. They're busy surviving. Your father may be out from dawn till dusk, working land that isn't even his. Your mother juggles cooking, spinning, cleaning, scolding, and praying, not always in that order. They love you, but love here looks like a crust of bread saved, a scolding that stops short, a hand on your back when you cough. Discipline is a group activity. Your parents yell, your neighbors judge, and your grandparents mutter cryptic threats involving saints and turnips. If you're really unlucky, someone fetches the switch. Medieval parenting advice? Mostly verbal passed-down wisdom involving fear, guilt, and the occasional medicinal herb that definitely doesn't work. Still, there's tenderness, a mended tunic, a lullaby hummed while scrubbing laundry, a shared bowl of something warm when the fire's low. It's not sentimental, but it's real. Mealtimes are loud, messy, and mostly carb-based. If you're poor, dinner might be pottage. Again, a thick stew of barley, vegetables, and whatever didn't run away fast enough. If you're lucky, there's a chunk of hard cheese or a bit of meat left over from someone else's better day. Bread is sacred. Ale is normal. Even for kids, water is suspicious. Milk is seasonal. And everything is eaten with your hands or a dull spoon you share with at least 2 other people. During these chaotic evenings, stories are currency. You might hear a tale about a knight who battled a wind spirit, or about a girl who spoke to bees and got cursed by a forest witch, or about a cousin's cousin who saw a mermaid, though she might have just been very confused and very wet. Sometimes, a wandering storyteller visits. They wear too many scarves, carry too many pouches, and speak in a rhythm that makes even your father pause mid-complaint. They tell tales of distant lands, enchanted forests, and flying horses. You drink in every word like it's honey. You'll repeat those stories to your siblings for months, editing them wildly. At some point, the flying horse will breathe fire and defeat a giant cabbage. No one minds. There's no privacy. And secrets are a luxury. Everyone knows when someone sneezes, cries, or farts. But somehow, you still find hidden corners of the day to be yourself. A pause in the field, a few minutes alone at the well, a moment lying beneath a window, watching the moonlight dance on soot. Historians still debate whether medieval children developed individual identities or were merely seen as extensions of their households. But in these quiet in-between moments, you feel your selfhood blooming. Clumsily, but definitely, you're more than your chores, more than your lineage. You're a thinker, a dreamer, a joke cracker, a future maker. You just don't have the vocabulary for it yet. And when the night settles, when everyone's breath slows, and the fire is nothing but glowing whispers, you lie in the dark and listen to the rhythms of home, the crackle of cooling embers, the soft snore of your sister, the thud of a falling ladle. Someone forgot to hang. This noisy, muddy, unpredictable house. This is the world that shaped you. And you love it. Even when you're dreaming of anywhere else, morning creeps in, not with sunlight, but with noise-clattering buckets, groaning hinges, and the unholy shriek of someone finding a mouse in the grain bin. You peel yourself off the straw bedding, crusty-eyed and stiff, and stumble out into the chilly light like a tiny hungover scarecrow. Another day of childhood. Medieval style. Today, you're off to church. No, not just for praying, though there's a lot of that, but because this is one of the few places where education might happen. That is, if your family isn't flat broke or too busy keeping you elbow-deep in chores, But let's pretend you're one of the lucky ones. Literate in the loosest sense. Armed with a chalkboard and the sort of Latin vocabulary that includes exactly one prayer and 5 insults. The church smells like beeswax, stone dust, and lingering incense. You shuffle in with the other children and sit on a bench so splintery it probably has a vendetta. A monk stands at the front, muttering syllables, so ancient and mumbly they feel like a magical spell designed to lull you into permanent boredom. Occasionally, he slaps a stick against the lectern knot for drama, just to wake the sleepers. You jump every time. You trace your letters in sand or ash or whatever's available. Copying sacred texts you don't really understand but must never smudge. If you're very clever, you might even be taught to read aloud slowly, reverently, and always with one eye on the monk's stick. But education isn't guaranteed. For many, childhood learning happens at home or on the field. You learn to tell which mushrooms are food and which will make your soul walk backward. According to your aunt, you learn how to gut a fish, mend a roof with moss, and count sheep by name instead of number. You also learn narration by that. We mean the survival skills of deference, quiet chewing, and knowing when not to ask what's floating in your soup. Etiquette for medieval kids involves a lot of bowing, not burping, and never touching food until the eldest starts eating. Still, for those who do get some kind of schooling, there's pride in it. You carry your learning like a talisman. You show off your Latin phrases to other kids, misquoting scripture just enough to sound impressive. You recite things you don't understand with absolute conviction, just like most adults. Sometimes, a wealthy patron or traveling scholar visits. You stare at their robes, shiny boots, and rings like they're mythical creatures. One of them might ask if you can read. You nod too fast. Then forget everything except your own name. He gives you a fig anyway. It tastes like secrets. Historians still argue whether medieval education helped lift peasant children out of poverty or simply reinforced existing social ladders. Either way, for a moment, it feels like a ladder worth climbing, even if the rungs are slippery and smell like goat hair. Of course, not everything educational happens inside. You learn more from eavesdropping on adults than you'd ever admit. You hear how wars start, how neighbors feud, how your mother rolled her eyes at the Reeves' new haircut. This is the real curriculum delivered in whispers, half-truths, and clucks of disapproval. Festivals bring another kind of education, social navigation. At midsummer or Michaelmas, everyone gathers in chaotic celebration. You're expected to wear your best, least holy, tunic, mind your manners, and not set anything on fire. Good luck. At these events, you watch the adults with fascination. Who stands next to whom? Who speaks first? Who gets the last sausage? You learn hierarchy not through lectures but through observation. You understand that power isn't just held, it's performed. There's dancing. Of course, you join a circle of children spinning around a maypole, shrieking with delight and barely missing a tumble into the pig roast. Your crusha, baker's daughter with grass in her hair, laughs at your clumsy footwork, and you swear to learn every dance ever just to impress her. And in the shadows of these gatherings, you see the tensions too. A drunken shout, a neighbor refusing to toast another, You learn that community is stitched together with celebration and rivalry in equal measure. Then comes the walk home. You're tired, sticky with ale and honey, and your ears ring with music. You carry a squashed pie in your sleeve, like a relic. Back at home, your mother pretends not to see the grass stains, and your father mutters that you smell like a goose. You grin and fall asleep, smiling. The next morning, it's back to chores. But the memory of that festival clings to your thoughts, like syrup. And when you stir the pot, sweep the floor, or carry buckets twice your size, it hums beneath the surface like a secret melody. That's the thing about learning in the Middle Ages, it never really stops. Whether it's in the chapel, the barn, or the chaos of celebration, you absorb the world one odd lesson at a time. There's no such thing as a school bus in your world, just feet. Maybe a cart, if you're lucky, and the occasional unhelpful goat blocking your path. But you don't mind. Today is your first proper trip outside the village. Not far, just to the market town nearby. But to you, it might as well be Constantinople. You clutch a worn cloth pouch of herbs. Your mother packed to trade and start walking with the others at first light. The air smells like dew and dung. Because of course it does. The road is bumpy, muddy, and crisscrossed with wagon ruts deep enough to swallow a shoe. You dodge puddles, not always successfully, and listen to your older cousin recite every boring rule about market stalls and fair prices, as if he's Moses delivering commandments. Still, the excitement builds. You've heard stories of jugglers, minstrels, pickpockets, and pies the size of your face. You're secretly hoping to see at least 2 of those, preferably at the same time. The town gates loom ahead, wooden, creaky, and flanked by guards who look like they haven't smiled since the last plague. One checks your group lazily, grunts something about tolls, and waves you through. And suddenly, you're inside a different world. The market town. It's loud. So loud. Bells clang. Traders shout. Animals squeal. And every second person seems to be selling something, or yelling about someone stealing it. The smells crash into each other, sizzling meat, sweaty horses, spoiled cabbage, hot bread, and something you sincerely hope isn't fish. You breathe it all in and instantly cough. Welcome to civilization. You trail your cousin as they weave through stalls like a seasoned eel. They haggle over onions, inspect cloth, and slap coins down like they mean it. You try to copy their stern expression, but it mostly looks like you're squinting at a fart. You stop at a booth selling colored glass beads. They're so bright, so unnecessary, and so beautiful, you can't help staring. The vendor grins and winks. "For a sweetheart?" he asks. You blush, mutter something about decoration for the mule, and scurry off. In one corner of the square, a yester's Jugling knives. In another, a monk is preaching fire and brimstone to an audience of 2 dogs and a child picking his nose. Across from that, a toothless woman sells potions from little corked bottles. You hear her mutter, "Guaranteed to cure lovesickness, foot rot, and in-laws," which honestly sounds like a bargain. Historians still argue whether medieval markets functioned as genuine economic hubs or glorified social theaters, but for a kid like you, it's pure magic. The colors, the voices, the clinking coin sits, a festival, and a school, and a battlefield, all rolled into one. You run into someone from your village, old Gervais, who smells like garlic and frowns like it's a career. He warns you not to wander too far. You nod politely and immediately wander too far. Within minutes, you're almost trampled by a horse, briefly accused of stealing an apple, and definitely catch sight of someone relieving themselves behind a barrel. City life is wild. Somewhere between the pottery stand and the puppet show, you make a trade of your own. A bundle of thyme from your pouch for a honey cake slightly larger than your thumb. It's a terrible deal. But the cake is warm, and your fingers are sticky with joy. You return to your cousin just in time to hear them arguing about the price of smoked herring. The fishmonger shouts. Your cousin shouts louder. Someone nearby starts laughing. You glance around and realize something astonishing. You understand what's happening. You're not just tagging along. You're part of it now. The walk home is slower. Your legs ache. Your hands are full, and your brain buzzes with every image and sound of the day. You show off your honey cake. Your cousin rolls their eyes and says you overpaid, then eats half of it anyway. That night, curled up in the heap of blankets and elbows you call a bed, you replay the day in your head. The juggler, the bead seller, the monk with opinions about goats. And you feel something odd and new, confidence. You went to the market. You walked the noisy maze, made a trade, survived the chaos, and even remembered your mother's herbs. You didn't get robbed, trampled, or sold to a traveling minstrel. All in all, a wildly successful adventure. You drift off to sleep with the faint sound of a lute still ringing in your ears. Or maybe that's just your cousin snoring. Either way, your dreams tonight smell like honey, herbs, and very overpriced onions. It starts with a shout, then another, then a bell, then chaos. You leap out of bed in a tangle of limbs and blanket. Heart pounding. Fire? A wolf? No, just the tax collector. You peer through the shutter and spot a horse that looks more important than it has any right to. A man with a scroll and a sneer dismounts and begins reading in a voice that sounds permanently unimpressed. Behind him trail 2 scribes, a few guards, and a mule that seems to judge everyone equally. Yes, it's tax day in your quiet medieval village, also known as Surprise. Let's ruin morale day. Taxes, come in coin, if you're lucky, in turnips if you're not. You and your family gather what you can: cheese, eggs, a tiny jar of honey, and hand them over with the practiced grimace of people who've been doing this a while. The collector doesn't thank you. He just ticks a box and moves on like a human ledger. You're not quite old enough to be responsible for tax paying, but you are old enough to carry the basket. Flinch when a hen escapes, and receive a disapproving glare from someone in a cape. As the procession moves through the village, people grumble in that very specific way that doesn't quite count as rebellion. An old man mutters, "Wasn't like this under King Harold." No one corrects him. Everyone just agrees. Even though half of them weren't alive then. This is your first real glimpse at what grown-ups whisper about: power, authority, injustice. You start to understand how fragile your little world is when measured against the weight of scrolls, signatures, and heavily armed men who do not smile. Later, in the fields, You overhear your uncle say taxes are what keep the roads clear and the king's peace intact. Your father snorts and says, "What peace?" It's a conversation they've had before. You file it away as another grown-up loop you'll eventually join. Still, the visit gives you things to think about, like the nature of rules, the difference between right and enforced, and why people in silk always seem to get what they want without carrying anything themselves. You also start noticing the layers of society more clearly. Lords live in castles or manors with slightly fewer rats and definitely more bread. They send their people to collect rent, punish theft, or conscript men to fight in distant wars. You've seen some of them ride past before tall, serious, and entirely unbothered by your muddy face. The manor house isn't far from your village. A big stone block, surrounded by walls that look like they're waiting for a siege that'll never come. You've only been inside once, say, to deliver herbs, and you remember the floors being so clean you were afraid to breathe. The Lord's son is about your age. He had shoes that matched, and a pet hawk. You had blisters and a stick with a personality. He asked what your name was. You said, He called you, for the rest of the visit. You haven't spoken since. Historians still argue whether the feudal system was a stable foundation or an elaborate excuse for inequality. All you know is it involves a lot of bowing, waiting, and pretending not to mind being invisible. Your own family doesn't talk about class. They talk about survival, the basics. Keep your head down. Keep your tools clean. And never argue with someone who owns more than one belt. Once in a while, someone from the manor sends down leftovers. A heel of bread. A bowl of stew. Once, an entire pie. But it tasted odd, and you're still not convinced it wasn't a failed experiment. You ate it anyway. That's what you do, every now and then. Though, the lines between classes blur. A harvest festival might bring everyone to the same field for dancing and awkward mingling. You see the steward trying not to look uncomfortable. You see the reeve trying very hard to appear generous. And you just focus on stealing an extra honey cake without being seen. And through all of it, you watch and learn. You observe the way respect is performed, who steps aside, who speaks first, who carries nothing and is thanked for it. You absorb the social choreography like a dance zone you'll need to know, even if no one teaches it outright. At night, back in your little corner of the world, you wonder what it would be like to be in charge, to walk into a village and be feared, not ignored, to eat what you want, wear what you want, and sleep without worrying about leaks in the roof. Then your sibling farts in their sleep, and the entire tent erupts into chaos. Power, you realize, is overrated. Sleep, on the other hand, is priceless. You wake to the heavy clang of the village bell, not for fire this time. Not for taxes either. No. Today is a feast day, which means one thing: no work. Or at least, slightly less work. Accompanied by bread that isn't entirely stale and a solid chance of someone dressing up as a saint while clearly being the town drunk. You scramble to get ready. Your nicest tunic isn't nice by any stretch, more like least patched, but it's enough. You smooth your hair with spit and optimism. Then join the trickle of villagers heading toward the commons. Feast days are rare and precious. They honor saints, victories, celestial events. Or, occasionally, the miraculous non-arrival of locusts. Today's celebration? Saint Blaise, patron of throats and wool combers. Make of that what you will. At the heart of the village, stalls are being set up, pies are being unveiled, and someone's already dropped a jug of cider. There's music well. 2 fiddlers and a drumbet. It counts. You're giddy from the change of pace, and the faint hope that you might not have to clean something before sundown. Children dart everywhere, screaming in languages only they understand. You spot the pig-chasing competition and immediately sign up. The pig looks at you with disdain, as if aware it's about to become entertainment. You chase it anyway. You fall in the mud. Twice. Someone laughs so hard they drop a goose. You consider this a win. There's also storytelling. An old woman with no teeth and infinite charisma begins to weave a tale of dragons, knights, and something called cheese justice, which no one questions. You lean in close, spellbound, even though the dragon clearly speaks in her neighbor's voice. The best part of feast days, of course, is the food. Your family brings a contribution roasted onions with herbs, and you pray they're not burned. In return, you get to nibble on things your normal week would never allow. Sugared almonds, fresh cheese, and, yes, the tiniest square of meat pie that tastes like victory. Games begin after the meal. You're dragged into a sack race you didn't sign up for. Win by accident when the front runner trips on a chicken and are handed a cabbage as a prize. You hold it aloft like a trophy. Then comes the dancing. You hover awkwardly at first, because your feet have never quite agreed to work in rhythm, but eventually the music carries you, and you're spinning, laughing, colliding with someone's uncle, and not even caring when your shoe flies off into the barley. There's a moment, just a brief one, where you stop and look around. The candles flicker in the dusk. People are full and happy, and the fiddler has switched to a song that sounds suspiciously like a drinking tune slowed down for toddlers. You breathe in deeply and feel something close to peace. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had leisure time or whether feast days were just distractions from relentless labor. From where you're standing with sticky hands and a cabbage crown, you'd call it a break, maybe even joy. As the sky darkens, the crowd gathers around the fire. Someone sings a hymn with 3 wrong verses. Someone else tries to harmonize and mostly just howls. You roast something on a stick that might once have been a turnip. It's fine. It's all fine. Suddenly, there's a rush of excitement. A traveling performer has arrived, probably drawn by the noise or the promise of a half-empty cider barrel. He juggles fire, tells jokes no one fully understands, and somehow pulls a coin from your ear. You're so impressed. You nearly fall into the fire pit. The evening winds down slowly. People begin to drift home, blinking and yawning. You help gather plates, pat the pig on the head. Yes, it's still here. And say goodnight to friends you usually only grunt at over chores. You and your siblings walk home in the moonlight, singing snatches of the hymn and arguing about whether you technically won the pig race. You all agree to call it a group victory. The pig snorts in agreement. Back inside, you settle into your blanket pile, still wearing half your cabbage crown. Your mother kisses your forehead and mutters something about washing your feet tomorrow. You smile into your straw pillow, warm and full. Not every day is like this. In fact, most aren't. But that's what makes it special. You'll carry the glow of St. Blaise's feast with you through the muddy days to come, like a flickering ember tucked behind your ribs. And someday, when you're old and loud and missing teeth, you'll tell the tale of the dancing pig, the turnip, marshmallow, and the cabbage prize. And your audience, whether they believe you or not, will lean in just the same. Today starts differently. There's no bell, no firewood gathering, no wrestling with goats who hate you for reasons unknown. Instead, you're being sent to the monastery. Not to join it, don't panic. Just to deliver a basket of eggs and a message sealed with more wax than you thought necessary. Monks are strange like that. You set out at sunrise, basket balanced carefully, wondering whether you'll see a miracle or just get glared at by someone who hasn't smiled since Lent. The path to the monastery is long and quiet, cutting through fields, woods, and the occasional aggressively territorial goose. You whisper a prayer that you won't be pecked. After a muddy hour, the monastery rises into view. It looks like someone took a fortress, added prayer, and then covered the whole thing in ivy. The gate creaks open, and a novice barely older than you waves you in with a sigh that suggests he's already over today. Inside, it's all hushed footsteps, drifting incense, and the constant soft rustle of robes. You try not to breathe too loudly. The monk in charge of guests accepts your offering without much reaction. Eggs, he says, like you brought him a bag of gravel. He takes the sealed note, eyes it like it's cursed, then disappears into the cloister. While you wait, you wander very politely. You pass by the scriptorium, where other monks copy texts with the intensity of people diffusing bombs. Their fingers are stained with ink, their expression somewhere between holy focus and profound annoyance. You think about asking a question, but one of them gives you a look that could silence a rooster. Then, the library. You've never seen so many books in one place. Well, not books, exactly parchments. Scrolls, bound volumes, chained to desks like they're flight risks. A monk notices your wide eyes and grunts. You can't read. Can you? You shake your head. He softens slightly. Neither can most people. Doesn't make you stupid. Just makes you normal. He lets you touch a book corner. Just one. The vellum feels soft, like worn leather. You wonder who wrote it, who read it, and what secrets it holds. Maybe it's just about vegetables. Still, you feel smarter by proximity. A bell tolls. The monks gather for prayer, drifting past you in a cloud of wool and mumbling. You watch from a distance, mesmerized by the rhythm, the kneeling, standing, chanting, bowing. It feels ancient, and in its own way, beautiful. Historians still argue whether monastic life preserved knowledge or hoarded it. But in this moment, you just feel like you've stumbled into a world that's both old and eerily quiet, and maybe slightly obsessed with barley. At the garden, you find a monk humming to his leeks. You compliment them. The leeks, not the humming. He tells you the secret is prayer and horse manure. You nod, solemnly. unsure how to respond to that kind of wisdom. Eventually, your escort returns. He thanks you well. He says, "You may go," which is practically a sonnet in monk speak. You take one last look at the stone halls and the vines curling over the windows. Then start the long walk back. Basket empty, but head full. On the way, you imagine what it'd be like to live there? You'd rise at dawn, chant until your throat dried up, eat lentils forever, and spend your days copying texts while squinting at candles. No goats. Though, so that's a plus. You reach home just before dusk. Your mother asks if the eggs were accepted. You nod. Your brother asks if you saw a ghost. You say, "Not exactly." Then you sit down and tell them about the chained books, the grumpy scribe, the singing leek monk, and the way the walls echoed, like they remembered every word ever spoken. That night, you dream in scrolls and symbols. You wake, half convinced you've learned to read just by being near the right words. You haven't, but it's nice to pretend. You're woken up by someone shouting your name and the word apprenticeship in the same sentence, which is generally not how you prefer to start your mornings. Still, the word hangs in the air like the smell of baking bread warm. Exciting, and vaguely suspicious. Apparently, the cooper's assistant has run off. No one knows where. Some say he fled to a town with better wages. Others claim he joined a group of traveling jugglers. Your cousin insists he exploded. Regardless, there's a vacancy, and your father thinks you should fill it. You trudge toward the cooper's workshop, wondering what exactly a cooper does besides yell and hammer things. Spoiler alert, that's mostly it. Barrels don't make themselves, and there's a constant demand for things to hold wine. Grain, salted fish, and the occasional mysteriously lidded object no one should ask about. The cooper master, Edrices, a man of few words and many eyebrows. He grunts once, hands you a tool, and points at a half-finished barrel like it insulted his mother. "Shape the stave," he says, then walks off. That's your entire orientation. Coopering turns out to be part woodworking, part geometry, and part muttered frustration. You learn to shave wood into curved staves, soak them in water, fit them together, and bind them with hoops that are somehow both too tight and too loose at the same time. You also learn that splinters are not only frequent, they're philosophical. You work beside a journeyman named Lewin, who's missing 3 fingers and has never once explained how. He hums while he works, badly, and tells stories about barrels he's proud of, as if they were children. That one there held the Duke's ale. Beautiful piece. Held pressure like a stubborn mule. By the end of your first week, your hands are raw, your back aches, and your clothes smell like wet oak. But when you finish your first barrel wobbly, leaky, and possibly haunted, you feel something strange. Pride. You made a thing, a useful thing, and only cried once. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships were paths to opportunity or cleverly disguised servitude. All you know is that being yelled at by a master craftsman is still better than being yelled at by a goat. There's a rhythm to it. Eventually, you arrive early, sweep the shop, fetch tools, prep wood, and occasionally dodge Edric's flying corrections. You get good at predicting when the barrel will creak in protest and when it's just teasing you. You even get a nickname, Splinty. It could be worse. Lunches are quiet affairs, unless Lewin decides to recite his barrel ballads, which are exactly as terrible as they sound. One rhymes stave with grave, and you don't think he meant it to be threatening? But still. One afternoon, a merchant comes in needing a set of traveling barrels. You watch as Edric speaks with him in the careful tones of a man who knows his worth. They haggle. They measure. They argue about hoop widths. Eventually, the deal is struck, and you're told to fetch the ash wood. You practically sprint. The barrels will take days to complete, and you're allowed to work on one under supervision. It turns out the merchant's daughter is your age and insists on watching. You try to act very competent while also not hammering your own thumb. She asks questions. You panic. You explain barrel expansion using a metaphor involving cats. She looks confused but impressed. You'll take it. As the barrels are loaded onto a cart, Edric nods at yours. That one'll do? It's the closest thing to a compliment you've heard from him, and it hits harder than you expect. Lewin pats your shoulder and whispers, "Told you. Mule tight." Oh, there's a fringe rumor in the village that coopers are secretly wizards. Since barrels keep things dry and preserved in ways that feel suspiciously magical, you know better. It's not magic. It's sweat, angles, and swearing under your breath until the wood listens. Back at home, your father asks how it's going. You shrug. Say, "It's work," and try not to smile. Your little brother pokes your splintered hands and asks if you fought a bear. You say yes, and it fought dirty. Later that night, you sit by the hearth, turning a small hoop of scrapwood in your hands. It's imperfect, but it's yours. You trace the curve, remembering each step of shaping it, fitting it, forcing it into place until it held fast. You fall asleep dreaming of barrels, a girl with too many questions, and a life that, for once, feels like it's taking shape. Your feet hurt, not in the usual ran from geese and lost a shoe kind of way, but in the I've been standing for 6 hours straight in a freezing stream while holding a net way. Because today, you're helping with the village fish harvestan event, equal parts survival necessity and community circus. The local river is at its seasonal low, and that means one thing: time to trap, drag, scoop, and occasionally argue with anything slippery that calls it home. The entire village gathers at dawn, tools in hand, sleeves rolled up, and that look of quiet dread reserved for events involving mud and teamwork. Your job is simple in theory: hold the net across one part of the stream with 3 other kids, while older villagers create a ruckus upstream, driving the fish toward you. In practice, it means slipping, freezing, and occasionally catching something that is definitely not a fish. Someone screams. It's just a frog. Another person screams louder. Still a frog. Eventually, though, the fish do come, flashing silver beneath the surface, darting like little aquatic smugglers. You feel the tug in the net. Shout something heroic, and together you haul it to shore. Inside, a decent catch some river trout, a few ales, and one very confused turtle. You quietly release the turtle while no one's looking. It blinks at you in grateful confusion. Eel wrangling is its own ordeal. They don't behave. They squirm. You end up with one in your shirt, another in your boot, and somehow one in someone's hat. It's chaos, but productive chaos. By midday, the baskets are heavy, your arms are sore, and your reward is a boiled egg and a sip of ale, so watered down it probably counts as tea. The fish are sorted some, salted and smoked for preservation, others distributed fresh to families, and a few saved for the manor lord, who may or may not remember to say thank you. The eels, unfortunately, are also kept. You'll be seeing them again at dinner, and possibly breakfast. You help dig pits for the smoking fires. The smoke stings your eyes, but it smells better than most things you've worked with. So you're not complaining. You even get to help string fish on wooden rods carefully, so they don't fall into the coals or into the hands of that kid who steals anything not nailed down. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were protein-starved or simply had fewer meat sources than we're used to. Days like today make it clear that fish was the affordable middle ground. You don't need a pasture or a pig pen, just a net, some patience, and a lot of slipping. You sit beside the fires as the sun dips low, watching the fish curl and dry. Lewin the barrel journeyman stops by, eyes a trout, and says, "If you name it, you can't eat it. You name it anyway." He shrugs. "Your funeral? You're allowed to keep one fish for your family." You cradle it like a trophy, imagining the grand feast ahead. Your sister sees it, names it Wiggles, and insists on giving it a proper burial. You say no. She pouts. Compromise, you cook it. She says a few words over the pan. The eel, true to form, returns for dinner. Boiled this time. Slimy, but, to be fair, seasoned. You pretend to like it because your mother is watching. Later, you bury the leftovers beneath a bush and whisper revenge into the dirt. Before bed, you and your friends sit around talking about the biggest catch, the slipperiest escape, and the frog that definitely wasn't a demon, no matter what Tom insists. You pass around a crust of bread and swap stories until the fire dies down. You lie awake for a while, your muscles buzzing from the work, and your hair still faintly smelling of fish smoke. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it's real, tangible, and somehow satisfying. You wonder if the fish remember any of this. Probably not. But you will. You wake up to the sound of hooves. Not just one or two like when the miller's donkey escapes, but many. Dozens. Maybe more. It rattles the ground and your bones. Something's coming. And judging by the shouting outside, it's not another fish day. You rush out, still pulling on your tunic, squinting against the dawn light. A line of riders thunders past messengers, guards, a few well-dressed nobles who look like they've never washed their own feet. Dust clouds rise behind them like little storms. It's not war. Thank the saints. But it's definitely something big. Word spreads like spilled grain. The king's men are passing through, and not just any men. It's an official royal procession. You don't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Honestly, both. The villagers start scrambling to clean the road, sweep their doorways, and make everything look marginally less miserable. You're told to help lay rushes along the main path, crushed herbs and straw, to make it smell less like you. Some of the adults even try to scrub the side of the church. It doesn't help much. Stone can only look so clean when it's held together by 200 years of moss and hope. Then come the orders. Line up. Look humble. Don't speak unless spoken to. You stand shoulder to shoulder with other kids, practicing your bow and trying not to step in anything that might stick to your foot for the next 6 days. Finally, they arrive. Bright banners flap in the breeze, painted with lions, crosses, and at least one creature that looks like a ferret with wings. Horses gleam. Armor shines. The officials ride slowly, examining your village like it's a piece of bread they might or might not eat. One even wears a golden circlet and a robe so heavy it could double as roofing. Historians still argue whether these processions were exercises in governance or sheer royal vanity. But to you, it feels like watching gods descend. Slightly judgmental gods, with very clean boots. Then, something truly shocking happens. They stop, right in front of your village green. A herald unrolls a scroll and starts speaking in that slow, dramatic voice that makes everything sound like it's being read from the heavens. A new tax is announced. Surprise. But also a decree. The nearby forest will now be partially open to the village for hunting on certain days, with permission, and absolutely no boar. Your father mutters something unholy. The reeve elbows him sharply. The mood lifts slightly. This is actually good news. The forest has long been off-limits under penalty of fines, stocks, or being chased by someone in chainmail. This might mean better meals, more firewood, and maybe fewer arguments over who owns the scrawny deer that wanders too close to the fields. The procession continues, but a few riders linger. One speaks with the reeve while looking over the livestock. Another examines the church's crooked roof and jots something down. You try to peek at his parchment, but are gently herded back by a guard with zero patience. One of the king's men tosses a coin into the crowd of children. Chows erupts. You dive, elbow, and somehow come up victorious, a tarnished silver penny, worth more than anything you've held in weeks. You immediately trade it with your brother for his future chores. Best bargain of the year. That evening, the village holds a small feast, not out of joy, but out of relief. The tax is annoying, but the forest access could change things. There's singing, slightly undercooked bread, and a stew that possibly contains pigeon. You don't ask. Later, you sit by the edge of the green, watching the stars flicker back into view, wondering what it would be like to ride with the king's men, to sleep in tents of embroidered silk, to eat food without bones in it. You imagine yourself atop a war horse, trailing a banner, handing out decrees to villages like yours. Would you be kind, or just very well dressed? As you walk home, the rushes you laid this morning are already crushed and muddied. That's life, isn't it? A moment of splendor, trampled by hooves and boots, gone by sunset, but it leaves a story. And tonight, that's enough. You wake to shouting again, this time not about kings or eels or frogs mistaken for demons. It's a fire, not a great one. Thankfully, just a small blaze in the baker's thatch roof. quickly doused with a bucket brigade and a few very angry chickens. But it's a reminder that in a world made mostly of wood, straf, and hope, flame is everyone's quiet nightmare. So today, the village decides it's time to reinforce the fire watch. You're assigned to help the carpenter build more ladders and water hooks, basically giant iron pokers used to pull burning thatch off roofs before everything goes up like dry bread crusts. It sounds noble. It mostly involves splinters. The carpenter is a grumpy old man who smells like resin and boiled turnips. He communicates almost entirely in grunts, and the occasional barked, "No," before you've even done anything. But he knows his stuff. You watch him shape beams with an adze that's older than your grandmother's teeth, measuring everything twice and still muttering as if the wood personally offended him. Your job is to hold the pieces in place, fetch nails, and try not to hammer your thumb. You succeed at 2 out of 3. It's fine. You still have 9 others. Fingers are mostly optional in this profession anyway. He lets you try your hand at making one of the ladder rungs. It comes out crooked. Very crooked. Like, is this a prop from a comedy play? Crooked? But he shrugs and says, still holds weight, which in carpenter terms might be the equivalent of a standing ovation. There's something weirdly satisfying about watching a ladder come together. Each joint is pegged tight, every rail aligned just so. You realize for the first time how much thought goes into even the simplest tools. Everything here is built with intention, because it has to be. There's no factory, no backup supply, no overnight shipping. If your ladder breaks, someone breaks their leg. That night, the village holds a fire drill. Not officially. Of course, just an excuse to test the new gear and make sure no one's completely useless in a crisis. Everyone gets assigned roles. Your friend Will gets to shout, "Fire," repeatedly. He's a little too excited about it. You and a few others race to unhook the ladders and line up buckets at the well. It's all chaos and shouting and splashing. But it sort of works. Mostly, only one person ends up soaked. And the fake fire is out in under 5 minutes. A new record. Historians still argue whether medieval communities had structured emergency response systems or just ran around screaming until someone solved it. Judging by today, the answer is both. Afterward, there's a quiet pride in the air. Even the carpenter admits, the new ladders aren't entirely awful. The reeve gives a small speech about community and vigilance, and not setting your chimney on fire again, looking pointedly at the baker, who tries to look innocent and fails. The best part? You get to keep your rung. The crooked one. The carpenter says it's a reminder. Of what? You're not sure. Possibly humility. Possibly to never let you cut straight lines again. Either way, you tuck it under your bed like a treasure. You spend the evening helping your mother patch a hole in the roof nut because it's on fire. But because winter's coming, and even straw gets tired, you pass her nails and hum one of Lewin's barrel songs until she throws a cloth at you. The stars are out by the time you're done. You sit on the edge of the roof, watching the smoke from hearths rise gently into the sky. The air smells like wood and cold earth. Somewhere down the lane, someone's still laughing about the drill. You smile. It's not a great system. It's not even a good one. But it's yours. You head inside. You're crooked, rung still under your arm. And for the first time in a while, you feel safe. Not because the danger is gone, but because you know what to do when it comes. And because now, at least, your ladder doesn't wobble. You're in charge of watching the geese today. Again, it's not glamorous. It's not heroic. But it's your turn. And the geese have noticed. They're watching you, like feathery little villains. Ease narrow it. Wings, twitching with barely restrained violence. Somewhere between poultry and petty warlords. They strut across the meadow as if they own it. Which, to be fair, they kind of do. You have a stick, a crust of bread, and a strong suspicion that goose number 4 is planning something. You call her Matilda. She bites, so you sit under a twisted apple tree and try not to get flanked, chewing your bread and scanning for movement like a medieval guard dog. The geese graze. They honk. One tries to eat a snail and looks offended when it slimes back. And you think this is what it means to be responsible, to be trusted, even if just for an hour, with something that belongs to the village. These geese aren't just honking sacks of feathers. They're eggs. They're meat. They're the future of someone's Sunday stew. You've heard rumors that one of them is destined for the Lord's table. You hope it's Matilda. Historians still argue whether medieval children had real responsibilities, or just mimicked the adults until they were useful. But if you ask your back, your arms, and your mildly wounded ankle from the last goose chase, you're definitely contributing. Even if no one claps for goose wrangling. A local friar passes by on the road, nods, and blesses the geese. You don't know whether to be relieved or worried. Matilda hisses at him. He flinches. You feel a bit better. Around midday, you're joined by your friend, Aelric, who brings half a boiled turnip and big news. A traveling peddler is in the village square. A real one, with ribbons and bells, and maybe even a puppet. You trade goose duty for turnip duty, which is mostly just finishing it then sprint down the lane barefoot and breathless. The square is alive. The peddler is old, bearded, and probably half magic. His cart spills over with strange trinkets, glass beads, carved spoons, dyed cloth, and a tiny wooden hedgehog that costs more than your family's best cloak. But he lets you look. He even lets you touch. You choose a polished green stone, the size of a bean. Smooth, cool, mysterious. You trade him 3 eggs and a promise to sweep the chapel steps tomorrow. A fair deal, considering one of those eggs probably came from Matilda and probably isn't emotionally stable. The peddler tells stories. 2 far-off towns with dragons carved into gates. Of a dancing pig. Of a child who climbed a tree and found a cloud shaped like a cathedral. Some are true. Some aren't. You don't care. He makes you feel like the world is wider than this goose-ridden patch of land. One story stays with you, about a girl who trained her geese to follow her into battle. They wore tiny helmets, charged into conflict, and apparently saved an entire village from a bandit raid. The adults laugh. You don't. You make a note. You return to the meadow in the evening. The geese are all alive. Barely. Matilda looks smug. You show her the green stone. She tries to eat it. You sit in the grass, watching the sky shift from blue to molten gold. The geese settle. The tree creaks in the wind. You hold the little stone in your palm and imagine what else it's seen rivers. roads, maybe even a puppet or two. You don't know. You don't need to. Your life might be ruled by geese. But today, for just a moment, you stepped into something else, something bigger, and as you stretch out on the hill, your arms behind your head, Matilda nestled suspiciously close to your boots. You let the breeze carry your thoughts beyond the meadow. Maybe someday, someone will tell stories about you, preferably ones where you win. You're woken before dawn by an elbow in the ribs. Your brother's way of whispering, "Get up," is roughly equivalent to being trampled by a co-affectionate. But bone deep, today is market day, and you're going with him to the next village over. It's a rare treat and a long walk. So naturally, you overslept. You sling a basket over your shoulder, still half in a dream, and step into the chill air. The stars are just beginning to fade, and the first line of pink is drawing itself across the horizon like someone quietly scribbling with a coal stick. You yawn. Your brother hands you half a cold oat cake. It tastes like regret. The path winds through woods, then past open fields, still clinging to morning mist. You walk in that dozy silence, shared by people too tired to argue and too cold to joke. By the time you reach the crossroads, your toes have gone numb, and your brother is trying to invent a song about turnips that rhymes mash with rash. Finally, the market comes into view. Tents, carts, voices, and smoke all rolling together like the inside of a noisy stew. It's bigger than you expected. The air smells of fried dough, damp wool, and something distinctly horse-related. You love it. You're here to trade some cloth your mother wove, a few eggs, and one slightly cracked clay pot. You're hoping to come back with needles, dried carries, and if luck smiles, a wax tablet of your very own. You've seen older kids scribble on them, using styluses like tiny swords. You want that power. You follow your brother through the chaos, weaving between people shouting about apples, fish, and miracle ointment that is definitely just pig fat with thyme. Every few steps, someone bumps into you or yells about your basket. It's thrilling. It's terrifying. It's everything. At one stall, you see a blind man who sings riddles for pennies. Another has cages full of pigeons with colored ribbons tied to their feet, supposedly trained to carry messages. Historians still argue whether medieval pigeons were used in rural communication or just made fancy pets for bored lords. Either way, they're mesmerizing. You trade the eggs for needles, the cloth for a bundle of herbs and an old comb, and the cracked pot for, well, nothing. The pot gets laughed at, but a kind woman lets you leave it behind near her fire. She gives you a roasted chestnut out of pity. Worth it. Then you see it, the wax tablet. It's smaller than you imagined, a bit scratched, but undeniably magical. The vendor eyes your green stone, yes. The one from the peddler. You hesitate. It's smooth. It's yours. It holds dreams. But the tablet holds stories. And so you trade. Your fingers itch to write. You borrow a stylus and carve your namer, at least an approximation. Since no one actually taught you spelling, you scratch in a little goose. 2. Probably Matilda. The trip home is slower. Your legs ash. Your brother hums off key. The road feels longer than it did this morning. But your heart is full. You keep checking your pouch to make sure the wax tablet hasn't vanished. It hasn't. Back in the village. The sun is sinking low. You show your haul to your parents. They nod. Impressed. Your mother runs her fingers over the needles. Your father smells the herbs and mutters about stew. They ask about the pot. You tell them it met a noble end. Everyone's satisfied. That evening, you sit near the fire. Tablet in your lap. You carve your second word, goose. Then, with a flick of your finger, you smooth the wax back over. It's a blank slate again. You can write anything. The geese are quiet tonight. Even Matilda seems content. Maybe it's the moon. Maybe it's the leftover chestnut you tossed her when no one was looking. You think of the market, the songs, the smoke, the pigeon sand. Wonder what else is out there. What other words you'll scratch into wax. What other roads you'll walk. Because now, you've got stories to tell. And a stylus that fits perfectly in your hand. You spend the next week obsessed with that wax tablet. Every spare minute. You're carving names, faces, and strange little maps of your village where the pig pen becomes a mountain range and the outhouse is labeled Dragon's Cave. It's addicting. It's yours. Your father says writing's for monks, but he lets you keep at it. Mostly because you've also gotten weirdly good at washing turnips. Balance. The village reeve walks by once, while you're drawing a goose with a sword. He squints, tilts his head, and mutters something about future scribes being a strange breed. Oh, sometimes you let the younger kids try the tablet. They mostly stab the wax or write things like poo. But one girl draws a perfect 5-petaled flower with no training at all. You tell her she's a genius. She tells you you smell like goat. Art is a team sport. One evening, you're invited to the manor. Not because of the wax tablet, because of your hands. Lady Isabel, who runs the household with a voice like boiled iron, needs help stringing beads for a gown. Delicate work. Your fingers are small. And you're cheap. The manor is another world. Stone floors. Tapestries. Real cheese. You walk in like you're entering a cathedral, trying not to gape at everything. There are windows with glass. Not many. And not big. But still glass. It glows like frozen rain. You spend the afternoon threading tiny beads onto silk thread, while Lady Isabel talks about trade routes, her idiot cousin, and why blue dye is outrageously overpriced. You nod. You don't know what half of it means, but you nod. She says a noblewoman once paid 2 chickens for a single thimble. You nearly choke. 2 chickens for one tiny metal hat for your finger. Historians still argue whether medieval thimbles were luxury items or just wildly overhyped by early marketers. Either way, you now want one. She lets you keep a broken bead. Blue, shaped like a tear. You add it to your pouch, next to your stylus, and a button that may or may not have belonged to a saint. On your way out, you pass the manor library. Not a big one, just a few shelves, but it smells like ink and dust and ancient whispering. A clerk with owl eyes lets you peek in. You see parchment, illuminated letters, a drawing of a lion that looks like someone melted a cat and gave it teeth. It's glorious. You want to stay. You want to copy every word. But you've got firewood to fetch and turnips to wash, and the goose to feed before she starts knocking over barrels again. Back home, you tell your brother everything. He asks if the manor food tasted different. You say yes. It tasted like raisins and judgment. That night, you dream you're a scribe in a great hall, writing on golden scrolls with a quill made from Matilda's finest feather. You're wearing robes. Everyone claps when you draw your little goose. You wake up with wax stuck to your elbow and no idea how it got there. You're assigned to help the village priest this week, technically a privilege, though it mostly involves sweeping things and pretending to understand Latin. Father Willem says it builds character. You're not sure what he means by that, but you nod and sweep anyway, because arguing with a man who can read is generally discouraged. The chapel smells like beeswax and old wood, with just a hint of sheep panic from last Sunday's blessing of the livestock. Your job is to keep the floor tidy, trim the candle wicks, and occasionally hold up scrolls while Father Willem squints at them. It's not bad work. Quiet, peaceful, except when he sings. That part is less peaceful. He lets you sit in on lessons sometimes. When the bigger boys aren't around to throw things, you learn that amen means so be it, and that St. Dunstan once supposedly pinched the devil's nose with red-hot tongs. Historians still argue whether that's metaphor, folklore, or just extremely specific wish fulfillment. Your favorite part of chapel duty, though, is the scribal cabinet, tucked behind the altar. It's a heavy chest filled with quills, ink pots, parchment scraps, and even a piece of chalk the size of your thumb. It's like stepping into a treasure hoard made entirely for your weird little wax-obsessed heart. Father Willem catches you one afternoon trying to copy a decorative letter G onto a flat stone. You brace for scolding, but he just chuckles and tells you about the monks at Lindisfarne, who once made books so beautiful they were said to blind the devil. That's probably metaphor too, but you don't care. You want in on that? So, after chores, you sneak back in and practice. You scratch lines and loops into bits of bark and pebbles, pretending you're making something holy. You mess up most of the time. Your G still looks like a nervous snail. But you're getting better. Back home, your brother thinks it's hilarious. He draws a lopsided M on the pig's side with soot and declares him Monk Bacon. Your mother does not find this funny. The pig does. One evening, the priest lends you a real page of parchment. Not a whole sheet, just a scrap, but it's thick, creamy, and smells faintly of sheep. You treat it like gold. You don't even draw on it for days. You just hold it, occasionally whispering things like, "You are my favorite thing that isn't edible." Oh, that same week, you get your first proper letter lesson. Just the alphabet, big blocky letters like gates and ladders. You learn that the Latin A is the same as yours. B is too. It's weirdly reassuring. You wonder if you can one day write your own name without carving it into wax or dusting it into dirt. Your fingers get inky. Your back gets sore. And your brain melts a little trying to remember whether D comes before E. But you love it? You really, truly love it. Then one day, the priest says something wild. If you keep practicing, he might teach you how to read aloud during Mass someday. You nearly drop your kill, your voice echoing through the chapel. Over the heads of the whole village, Your name listed on the scroll as one of the literate? That's not just survival. That's legend. So you get to work. Harder than ever. You practice every curve. Every flick of the pen. Every twist of every vowel. And as the candlelight flickers across the parchment, and your hand trembles just a little less with every stroke, you begin to believe, maybe you won't just read history. Maybe you'll help write it. It's raining again. The kind of steady, sullen drizzle that seeps into your bones and makes the world feel like a giant bowl of lukewarm soup. Mud oozes across every path, sucking at your boots with the enthusiasm of a starving swamp monster. Chickens huddle under carts like grumpy umbrellas. Even Matilda the goose, usually fearless, stalks through puddles with narrowed eyes, muttering goose insults under her breath. The day is one long squelch. You're on manure shoveling duty again, which is not made more poetic by the gentle pitter-patter of rain on thatched roofs. Every pile you move seems to breed two more. You suspect some kind of dark compost sorcery is at work. Eventually, you escape into the barn, pretending to check the grain sacks while really just hiding from the weather. It smells like hay, damp wool, and dreams of drier times. You press your cheek to a beam still warm from the oxen's breath and imagine what life would be like in a palace where people bathe more than once a season and floors are not edible. Marianne appears not long after, a basket of scrap cloth under one arm and a slightly chewed spindle in the other. She's here to mend cloaks, which means you're here to help her. Because that's how rural peer pressure works. She hands you a curved needle and a strip of blue wool and tells you not to stab yourself this time. You immediately stab yourself. Twice. She smirks but says nothing, which you appreciate. You chat as you work. The kind of easy, distracted conversation that floats on the rhythm of threading and knotting. Marianne says she wants to be a healer like her aunt, who once set a broken arm using only a stick, a prayer, and a terrifying amount of confidence. She's been gathering herbs and watching the older women crush things into goop. It's mostly about knowing which bitter leaf won't kill you. She says, comforting, she asks what you want to be. You consider saying, alive, which feels like the most realistic option. But instead you say, a scribe. You say it lightly, as if it's just a whim. But you can feel the weight of it settle into the hay between you. She doesn't laugh. She just nods. Makes sense. She says, you already talk like a book. You take it as a compliment. By the time the rain slows, you've stitched a decent row of hems and gotten only moderately tangled in thread. You help her gather the scraps and carry them back to her cottage, where her grandmother gives you a scone hard enough to be weaponized, but clearly made with love. That evening, the village green becomes a theater. A traveling troupe of players arrives mud-streaked, loud, and possessed of enough drama to power 10 feast days. They unpack drums, banners, and a dragon head made from an old goat skull and 2 broom handles. You recognize one of the actors from the last time they passed through, a man with a beard like a disorganized hedge and a booming voice that makes babies cry and dogs howl. They set up their makeshift stage, a few planks balanced on barrels, creaking ominously with every gust of wind. The whole village turns out, wrapped in cloaks and shawls, clutching turnips or leftover barley cakes. Even old Tomas comes, dragging his stool and muttering about how St. George never needed props in his day. The play begins at twilight, with a trumpet blast that sounds like a goose having a crisis. You're hooked instantly. The story is, of course, the legend of St. George and the dragon. Again, you've seen it a dozen times. Still, there's something magical in how the players throw themselves into it, breathing life into tired lines, turning muddy planks into a battlefield, a palace, a lyre. The dragon wheezes theatrically. The princess swoons with such flair, she topples off the stage. George himself nearly loses his sword in the pig trough. It's magnificent chaos. You laugh until your stomach hurts. Everyone does. Even Father Willem cracks a smile between his usual looks of theological concern. When the play ends, they sing a hymn, an as tradition demande, off-key, honest, beautiful. You join in, your voice cracking but proud, carried along by the strange unity that only bad singing and shared rain can bring. After the crowd disperses and the stage is half disassembled, you linger behind, watching the actors clean paint from their faces and shake out their props. One of them, an older woman, with a stitched-on crown and tired eye sketches you staring and winks. "Want to try the dragon head?" she asks. You nod so hard your hood falls off. It's heavier than it looks, smells like stale onions. But when you place it on your shoulders and snort through the painted nostrils, a little boy nearby shrieks and runs. You feel strangely powerful. You help pack up the last of the costumes, rewarded with a crust of bread and a thank you delivered in dramatic stage voice. Then you hurry home, clutching the memory like treasure. That night, on your wax tablet, you draw your own version of the dragon longer neck. Cell eyes. With tiny spectacles, you name him Gregory. Underneath, in shaky letters, you write, "Play by me." You stare at those 3 words for a long time. Historians still argue whether peasant children in medieval villages truly created original stories, or if their imaginations were simply shaped by oral tradition and religious instruction. But you're not waiting for a scholar's permission. You're writing your own legend, even if it starts on a wax tablet that smells faintly of turnips and keeps melting when it gets too close to the fire. The next morning is surprisingly bright. The rain has left, but in its wake comes a kind of shimmering freshness that only happens after a long soak. Puddles reflect the sky like little silver mirrors, and the air smells like wet stone and wood smoke. You squint at the horizon. For once, the clouds don't look like they're plotting anything. After chores feeding the pigs, helping mend a broken fence, and chasing Matilda away from someone's laundry, you slip away toward the village edge. There's a place beyond the hedgerow where the grass grows taller than your waist and wildflowers sneak up like they've been gossiping all night. It's your thinking spot. And today, you bring your wax tablet, your stub of charcoal, and a small round hunk of yesterday's hard cheese that doubles as a paperweight and snack. You settle under the old willow and continue your dragon play. Gregory now has a brother, Neville, who works in royal tax collection, but secretly writes poetry. You're not sure how it ends, but something about cursed treasure, dramatic betrayal, and at least one song feels right. You're interrupted by distant bells. Church time. You hurry, cloak flapping, wax tablet clutched to your chest like it's made of gold. By the time you slide into your spot on the pew, your hair is a wind-tangled mess, and your tablet has cheese grease on the corner. No one notices. They're too busy trying to look pious while quietly elbowing their siblings. Father Willem drones on about the necessity of obedience and the spiritual value of mud. You try to listen, really, but your thoughts wander. You glance up at the stained glass window. The saints stare down, dramatic and shiny, holding swords, scrolls, and the occasional holy fish. Historians still argue. Father Willem is saying whether St. Cuthbert actually slept in a bed of brambles to avoid temptation, or if it's simply allegory. You blink. That's surprisingly relevant. You make a mental note. Gregory, the dragon sleeps on Pinecanesnot for treasure. But self-discipline. Night's detail. After the service. It's market day. The village square buzzes like a wasp nest. You wander past stalls with cloth, baskets, herbs, and a suspicious man selling blessed sausages. You dodge 2 goats, 3 excited toddlers, and an old woman trying to convince everyone that her turnips cure coughs, baldness, and unkind thoughts. At the far end, near the edge of the baking stall, a boy about your age sits hunched over a stack of rough paper. He has ink on his nose and the intense focus of someone trying very hard to ignore the world. Naturally, you walk right over and bother him. He's a messenger's apprentice. It turns out, and he's copying practice letters. His handwriting is small, but confident. You say you like it. He shrugs and says it's easier than digging latrines. You ask if he's ever written a play. He laughs, then pauses. No, he says slowly, but I helped rhyme some verses once for a wedding song. The groom cried, though that might have been the price of the wine. Oh, you show him your dragon drawings. He grins and offers you a scrap of better parchment. Use this, he says. Won't melt. Ugh. You trade him a piece of hard cheese in return. He calls it fair. Back home, you test the parchment. The quill feels heavy in your hand. But the words look sharp. Real. Not like play thoughts or scribbles in the dust, but something meant to last. You write until your wrist aches. Gregory defends the misunderstood ogres of the swamp realm. Neville reveals his poetic identity to the king. A surprise twistone of the cows can talk. Your younger brother watches from the corner. That dragon's got weird feet, he says. You nod. He's got gout. It's very dramatic. On. Dinner is bread and stew again. Your mother hums as she stirs the pot. Your father sharpens a tool he doesn't actually plan to use tonight. The candlelight flickers, casting long shadows on the ceiling. You imagine them as characters on another stage. The rafters, their backdrop. The smoke, their mood lighting. Later, as the fire dies down and the embers glow like sleepy fireflies, you tuck your parchment under your straw mattress. Safe. Just in case, you lie awake thinking about that boy at the market. The parchment. The ink. The idea that something you write might make someone else laugh or cry or both. That your dragons might someday stomp through someone else's thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval children believed their voices mattered, whether they knew their thoughts, their scribbles, Their plays could shape anything at all. But here, under a blanket that smells faintly of onions, you feel it in your bones. Your words matter, even the ones written beside greasy cheese stains. You wake before dawn, stirred not by chores or the rooster's prideful screaming, but by the quiet thrill of what today brings. Its festival dia, rare punctuation mark in the long, dusty sentence of the village year. Even the air feels different. Holding its breath in anticipation, you sit up, brush straw from your sleeve, and immediately stub your toe on the chamber pot. Some punctuation marks are less graceful than others. Outside, the village is already stirring. Banners hang limp in the early breeze, not yet puffed by wind or laughter. The baker's chimney belches with unusual ambition, because no one wants undercooked bread during a festival. A group of boys try to hang a wreath over the well, and mostly succeed in hitting each other with it instead. You join them briefly, then sneak away before responsibility can cling to you like it usually does. The town square transforms slowly but deliberately. Stalls multiply like rabbits. Colorful fabric flaps from rooftops. Even old Tomas dusts off his knee-length tunic and complains less than usual. Always a sign of impending celebration or plague. You're not officially helping with any event. But that's never stopped you before. You help the brewer's apprentice carry barrels to the dance circle. You deliver a bundle of herbs to the healer's table. You even fetch the festival goose, Matilda, who is clearly displeased with her starring role. Her honking could summon demons. The main square turns into a living mural. There are jugglers, puppet shows, fried turnips on sticks, a man claiming to be able to guess your future from your left ear alone. He tells you you'll marry someone loud and mildly famous. Children race with sacks over their heads. A girl in green leads a goat dressed like a knight. No one questions it. You spend your copper coin on a honey cake shaped like a crescent moon. It's sticky, overbaked, and glorious. As you chew, you watch a group of players perform a miniature epic featuring a sock puppet Medusa and a heroic pig. It brings you to tears, though that may be the honey cake fighting your molars. Then, finally, the event you've waited for all day, the new tales contest. A battered stool is dragged to the center of the square. One by one, children step up, clutching scrolls, scrap parchment, or pure nerve. Some read stories. Others sing. One boy simply roars and pretends to be a bear for a full minute. The crowd loves it. You don't plan to participate. Truly, you don't. But when the final call for volunteers echoes across the square, something sparks. Maybe it's the breeze. Maybe it's Gregory the dragon whispering from your pocket. Either way, your hand rises. And suddenly, you're on the stool. The crowd quiets. Surprised, you hold up your parchment. Hands trembling. Voice small. This is a tale. You begin. Of two dragons, Gregory, who fought with fire, and Neville, who fought with poems. You read. At first, your voice wobbles like a loose tooth, but then someone laughs right on cue and you remember the rhythm. You feel each word land, like skipping stones across a pond. The crowd leans in. Even the man guessing ear futures stops and listens. You reach the end. Gregory saves a village not by fighting, but by teaching the ogres how to tell bedtime stories. Neville becomes a royal poet. The cow gets knighted. You close the parchment and wait. Silence. Then clapping. Real. Honest. Loud clapping. It fills your chest like sunlight. You bow awkwardly, nearly fall off the stool, and scurry back to the crowd, with ears burning and heart galloping. Someone pats your shoulder. Another asks if they can borrow your story for their little brother. You grin so wide your yaw creaks. The rest of the festival blurs dancing, laughter, songs you half know but sing anyway. At some point, you dance with Marianne. She tells you your dragons are charming, but wildly unrealistic. You promise the next story will feature an herb-wielding sorceress named after her. She rolls her eyes but smiles as dusk swallows the sky. The festival closes with lanterns, dozens of flickering lights rising like soft stars, drifting into the twilight. You watch them go, wondering if one carries your story on the breeze. Historians still argue whether medieval village festivals included original performances by children, or if they were strictly dictated by church and tradition. But tonight, under the fading gold of lanterns and laughter, you know the truth. You told your tale. You were heard. And, in a world of mud, chores, and borrowed boots, that is its own kind of magic. So now, as the lanterns fade and the hush of night returns, you find yourself back beneath your threadbare blanket, curled up in the quiet corner you've always known. The air is still thick with the smells of baked bread and trampled grass. And somewhere outside, Matilda the goose is snoring like a troubled bard. Your body is heavy from laughter, your mind light with the memory of words that flew further than your voice ever had before. The stars overhead don't shimmer with meaning. Not really, but tonight. They seem to blink back at you like old friends who enjoyed the story too. You lie still, listening to the soft, scratchy breathing of your siblings across the room, to the distant creak of a settling roof beam, to the warmth of your own pulse easing under your ribs. Your parchment is folded carefully beneath your pillow, its corners slightly bent, but its ink proud and dry. Maybe tomorrow you'll write a new story. Maybe you'll teach Marianne how to give her sorceress a pet owl that speaks only in riddles. Maybe you'll redraw that dragon one more time. This time, with properly dramatic claws. Or maybe you'll just watch the sky, smell the rain in the distance, and dream a little deeper. The world doesn't remember most children who lived in medieval villages. Their names were rarely carved in stone, and their thoughts rarely passed beyond the reach of a fireside. But tonight, in the soft shadows of sleep, you remember them. You've been them. And maybe, just maybe, someone centuries from now will imagine you back. The hay rustles. Your breath slows. That wax tablet rests safe beside you. The story, like the night, lingers. Sweet dreams.